Welcome to the Workshop Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, and today, on my script, I say today we don't have a guest, but I do actually have a guest, or a co-host, I should say, because it's my wife. Say hello.
Hi.
Good job. So, this week in my master's program, I've been working on a case study about perfectionism, and I thought it'd be interesting to share some of the information that I've learned this week.
I'm curious. Oh, I said I wasn't going to say anything because you have a script. I'm going to be quiet now. Hold it all inside until you're done.
All right. So, good job. So, what I wrote down in my script here, I'm sure we've all experienced those times in dealing with somebody who's a perfectionist, or you are a perfectionist yourself. I'm not a perfectionist, and my wife is definitely not a perfectionist either. But we have partied with several people who are perfectionists. So we know what we're talking. Anyway, so there's frustration involved in perfectionism, and perfectionism can absolutely be a debilitating problem. There's also times when perfectionism can also drive you to newer and higher heights. The question is, how do we implement the techniques in our lives in order to achieve the benefits of perfectionism and not the downsides? First, what is perfectionism? I'm going to read you a little bit from the paper that I was reading. It does a good job of defining it. So, quote, perfectionism is a personality disposition characterized by striving for flawlessness and setting exceedingly high standards of performance, accompanied by tendencies for overly critical evaluations of one's behavior. End quote. As creative people, we're typically the greatest critic of our own work. I'm sure we've all experienced those moments where we've made something and we can do nothing except obsess about the flaws that are in our work. Those little spots that we didn't say quite right, the little area in the picture of where a hand twitched and you lost the flow of the line, whatever the problem is. So, what separates beneficial perfectionism from maladaptive perfectionism? The article I'm referencing today, they break perfectionism into two categories: perfectionistic strivings and perfectionistic concerns. I'll quote a little from the paper again as it describes these two aspects. Negative reactions to imperfection. End quote. Research shows that perfectionistic strivings are typically not associated with negative outcomes. Perfectionistic concerns, on the other hand, are aspects of perfectionism that are associated with negative mental health outcomes. So what does this mean? When you're focused on what others think of your works or your efforts, that is maladaptive perfectionism. When you're focused on just being better than you were yesterday or the best you can be, that's the type of perfectionism that drives you to be better. So if you have perfectionistic problems, remember to be like Keith and don't care what anybody else thinks and just do your own thing. That's what I wrote down. So, what's your evaluation of that?
Well, every time you said the word maladaptive, just so you know, I see this weird picture of a Malamute in my head.
Like the dog Malamute, sort of Malamute, so it's just kind of like, ah.
It's like trying really hard, but like consistently walking into the closed door, kind of, like there's a glass door, and it's just like.
So if we get a Malamute when we move to the farm, we should call him maladaptive?
No, I think it was good. I think, creative people, we definitely struggle with that. I don't know, I think that I have a little bit more experience with the evaluation side of creativity than you have necessarily experienced in your life. I think you've more been evaluated in school in a science, right or wrong. Whereas I feel like I have experienced the post-secondary side of creativity education, and it's maladaptive.
Lots of name for dogs in it, is there?
Yeah, well, because I was thinking, when you said at the beginning, you're like, we're often our greatest critic, and I was like, well, I thought that until I was in music, and let me tell you, there's some pretty big, scary critics.
Going down the dog metaphor, there's lots of female dogs in the music.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something that I've been dealing with for a lot of years, trying to get my self-esteem back to the level of high school, which is a scary thought because, it was high school and an eating disorder and all manner of things are going on. I'm not really sure that I should be like...
The high point of mental health in high school is probably not a good statement for anybody.
No. Yeah, with that being said, I think it's something generational as well. Like our generation was very much, and I felt it like, and I'm also the child of perfectionist parent. But and that being said, like public perfectionism, right? You had to look perfect, you had to act perfect, you could not make mistakes.
Had perfectionist concerns.
Yeah, is that what it is?
Yeah, perfectionistic concerns is being concerned about the appearance and about the negative judgment of others, whereas perfectionistic strivings are the intrinsic things in yourself that make you want to achieve your peak performance.
Yeah. So, definitely grew up with that, and I think looking at that, you can see. I see lots of kids and lots of my friends who had very similar situations. It was I think it was like generationally, that was a lot of what we dealt with. In the like, you need to look perfect and you're going to marry this perfect person and have the perfect car. And I think we're all, I mean, obviously millennials, we're falling apart. None of us have what we thought we were going to have. And the perfectionistic stuff is, you know, I don't feel like I'm trying to force that on my children in the same way. I think our oldest got the brunt of my like, you need to do this and look this way and do these things. And now I watch my daughters and our son. I think we've talked a lot about how we did our best with what we knew, and we're changing things and trying different things because we're learning and growing and we make mistakes, which helps the perfectionist side of things. But like with our daughters today, or the things that my kids will wear out that I'm like mortally offended by because it doesn't look perfect. But I've been letting, I've been, sure, you can wear that color combination and that horrible polka dot shirt with those flowered flare pants. Yeah, it looks great. I love it. And it might seem like a little stupid thing to you. You have no idea the internal logic that goes on in my head.
I don't want to know, to be honest.
You don't. The Malamute goes crazy. It's gone. It's nuts. But I feel like to progression in that perfectionism, where I can more channel it into where it does help me to want to continue to grow and stuff again, like, is learning to channel it in a more positive way, which is, I think, kind of what you were talking about there, if I'm...
Yeah. The two aspects of it are the perfectionistic strivings are the intrinsic motivation aspect of it, the things that you want to do to get better at. And the perfectionistic concerns are the extrinsic things, so the things that the perceptions of others and the judgments of others, those are the things that are typically associated with negative outcomes, mental health-wise, in the literature. I think it goes beyond just perfectionism, though. In a broader sense, when we read through Carol Dweck's book, Growth Mindset, that intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, when you're extrinsically motivated, whatever that motivation is, whether it's fear of punishment or hope for reward, ultimately extrinsic motivation is inherently demotivating.
Yeah.
Whereas intrinsic motivation is inherently
motivating,
progressive and motivating. I was trying to think of a different word other than motivating. Yeah. So the fundamental problem with mental health is when people focus on the perceptions of others and they're concerned about what other people think of them. And that's what leads to the negative outcomes versus I'm okay with wearing polka dot pants and polka dot shirt and flared flower pants because that's what I'm comfortable in and that's what I want and that's what I think looks good. Or It happens to be the first thing that I pull out of the drawer, and I don't care beyond that. But yeah, getting yourself to that point when it comes to perfectionism or focusing on the flaws and details in things. Why are you focusing on those flaws and details? Is it because you're concerned somebody else is looking at it, or are you focusing on them in a growth mindset sort of way, going, I know I can do better. This is how I'm going to do better next time, or this is how I can fix this and get it to the next level.
No, it's true. And I think, like for me in music, it's so extrinsically, not motivating even, but so extrinsically focused on what other people thought and everything of what I was doing, that I completely fell out of love with it. And it honestly became, and is, sometimes physically painful for me to do. And I don't think that's something that I've ever expressed or understood before, actually. But it becomes painful. And I don't want to do it, and I don't want to be involved in it because of everything associated with it. And it's not that I ever had, like, I never failed a performance. Did I bomb some things? Yes. Have I fallen off the organ bench onto the keys below and forgotten music when I was up performing? Of course, all of those things happen. But when you're constantly setting yourself up to be judged by others, and social media right now is such a huge way that people do that, I mean, your mental health suffers. And it massively suffers. And you don't realize it until you have children, and then you're like, wow, I'm messed up. But I think finding that intrinsic motivation again, finding intrinsic motivation for anything again, can be really difficult. And I see you have an easier time with, in my perception, you have an easier time finding that intrinsic motivation for things. And I think my hesitancy comes from something that I was very intrinsically motivated for. I can remember the first day I picked up my flute when we bought it, and I was 12 years old, and I was going to start band, and I was so excited. I wanted to play for so long, and now I hardly touch it. I'm sad, really, because I loved it. But when you have that pressure for perfection from outside constantly, yeah, it's going to take some more therapy to get me through that. I think maybe that's something I should talk about next week.
We've dug in deep.
But I think, and that's something to be careful with yourself, but also with especially our kids. And it is something that I feel like I'm a lot more aware of, and especially with our kids, and they're practicing. Like, our son plays violin, not because he loves it, but because I think that playing an instrument is important. Our daughter is learning to play violin because she's in love with it and wants to play. And there's a difference. I thought long and hard this year about giving our son a pass and saying, fine, you know what, buddy, like, I know this isn't your thing. You can do something else. But my reasons for doing it go into my basis in education and how I know that music is better for your brain development. And he's good. Like, he plays well, and he's got great tone, and he's got a good ear, and there's all these wonderful things that I see, and I just want him to find joy in it. And so instead of saying no, we found him a different teacher this year, and he has found more joy in playing again, and he's playing some stuff that he actually likes, and it's not just all Suzuki. And I think those things help you to find that joy in it. But it's so different when you see our daughter, who's intrinsically got that, I want to play, I want to get better, I want to.
Yeah, to be fair, most of her intrinsic motivation is to get better at something than her brother is.
It's true.
Yes, that's intrinsic motivation.
It's true, but that part is different. But then other things, like, he's more intrinsically motivated about other things than she is, and we all have our different strengths and weaknesses. But that perfectionism, it's kind of like a bit of a disease. Like, once you have it, you have it. It's like mono; it never really goes away.
Well, with this, you
know what I mean? Like, it's like a constant. There's a constant back and forth between, like, am I doing this for the right reasons? Is this something that I need to be worried about. It's important to be perfect when you're driving so you don't hit other people and, do stupid things. But maybe the birthday cake doesn't have to be perfect, because what really mattered was that our daughter helped to make it because she wanted to help make a birthday cake. And that was really, really hard for me to do last year.
Yep. And then going back to the beginning, perfectionistic strivings versus perfectionistic concerns. That's what it comes down to, I guess, right? What's the purpose of achieving perfection at it? Is it so everybody else thinks you're wonderful? The reality of that is there's always going to be somebody better than you.
Right.
In some aspect. Even if you're the world's best at one thing, there's going to be somebody that's better at you and at something else. And so you're never going to be perfect. And so that's always going to be a burden versus the perfectionistic strivings of, I'm trying to be the best I can be at whatever task I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's what ends up separating it is I hadn't thought about this when I started writing this, but that's, I guess, what it comes back to again, is that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Where's what's the purpose? What's the direction? What's the motivation behind the action? Is it something that you want to do, or is it something that you think somebody else wants you to do?
Yeah, for me, finding that, thinking about what I want to do is hard.
Yeah.
Does it come naturally? Or maybe it did, but it doesn't anymore.
More has been beaten out of you.
Yeah.
And on that bombshell,
it's late. I mean, it's go to bed.
Yeah. So thank you for listening.
Happy birthday, by the way.
It's true. We're recording this on my birthday. I'm not going to tell you what day that is, but suffice it to say it's sometime in around the release date of this. Obviously before the release date. But anyway. Yeah. So if you found something helpful in this podcast, in part of our discussion, I'd really invite you to share it with somebody, whether that's on social media, tag me in it, or just share it with a friend that you haven't been talking about intrinsic, extrinsic motivation, perfectionism, all of those things, because we all suffer from them a little bit. And understanding that perfectionism in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's the motivation behind it that becomes the bad thing. And yeah. Any closing remarks? Any words of wisdom? Oh, great educator of wisdom.
I think just let a lot of it go. A lot of it doesn't matter. A lot of the things you're stressing over are not important. It's the take the long view. What is that in? Oh, I hate the way my brain works sometimes. Begin with the end in mind. And so if you're thinking of that in the 7 habits, right? You're thinking about getting your kids or getting yourself to this end goal. Does this really matter? Is this little thing that you're worried about that other people are going to see, does that really matter? Is failure on this okay? Because it's going to get you to where you need to go. Oh, that was creepy.
So if you found anything from this episode to be helpful and you want to reinforce it for yourself, I'd like to invite you to share it with a friend in the next 24 hours. That'll help reinforce it in your mind, and it'll help those around you, which is always a good thing. So thanks again for listening, and now I'd like to say thank you to all the amazing patrons of the Workshop Therapy podcast. You guys make the show possible. If you're finding the show helpful and you want to support it, there are a few tiers, including a simple $1 a month option to just say thanks. For $5 a month, you can get access to the patrons only feed that has a pre-show and a post-show, in addition to the regular podcast all in one feed. You all know that the good stuff happens after the official mics are off, right? If you can't support financially, I totally understand, but I'd love it if you left a 5-star review or told a friend about the podcast. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear that as well. Send it to questions@workshoptherapypodcast.com and I'll get it on the show. I want to say thank you to all the patrons of the Workshop Therapy podcast, but especially to the founding fathers, and they are Mr. Matthew Serio from Argiano Serio, Mr. Brad Harrison of Brad's Customs, Mr. Keith Drennan of Blackthorn Concepts, Mr. Eric Peterson of Overall Maker Works, Mr. Brandon Millichamp of Tectonic Creations, and the one and only the Grant Alexander. So a special thank you to the founding fathers, and thank you to everybody who supports and shares the Workshop Therapy podcast.